Well, hey friends, thank you so much for stopping by our channel today. What you're about to listen to is the most recent sermon preached and recorded live during a weekend service here at Chapel Springs Church. I invite you to subscribe to this channel right now. Head on over to our website, chapelsprings.org, for more information, and also check us out on social media. Thanks for being here. I'll catch you next time.
If you're here this morning to check the box, feel free to sit down. But everyone else, lean in for a moment. Because God's challenging us. He's challenging my heart. Who are you going to build your life on? A spouse? A boss? Who you're going to build your life on? A best friend? Who are you going to build your life on? A parent? A child? These are all people we love. But who's going to be the foundation of your life? Who is worthy of everything? Who is worthy? Spirit of God, right now, I ask that you bring to our minds what we have counted worthy besides you this week. Where did we give our time to, our attention, our devotion? And Lord, if it was not you, speak to our hearts right now. Convict us. Rearrange what needs to be rearranged. Mess up the furniture in our heart. Put you back at the center. We want to see you, Jesus. Just give him a moment. You've heard me say it. God, mess us up for your glory. I dare you to pray that right now. Mess me up for your glory. Jesus. Lord, have your way in us this morning. Have your way. As we wait on you, have your way. For those of us who are stubborn, he says, let's wait. Continue to wait. Jesus. Lord, may your word penetrate our souls. May it encourage, may it convict, may it nourish us. In the name of Jesus, amen. Amen. Jesus. You may be seated. In case you are a first-time visitor, my name is Stephanie. I'm one of the pastors on staff here, and we say welcome. And you know, we finished out our series last week, The Walk, from Ephesians. And for the next just few weeks, we're going to do some what we call one-offs. It's not going to be a series. And we're just going to kind of preach what God is speaking to us for that week. And I want to share a message with you today that I felt God gave me actually a couple years ago, and I've not shared it here. And I think this is the right time. But I want to talk about seers of the presence, seers of His presence, God's presence. I believe that we're in a time where God is calling seers of His presence for people who will have a prophetic vision and will be able to see Him in places that others don't recognize Him. So we're going to lean into that today as we go into John 21. And, I'm reminded about transition periods and those seasons where you're going from one place to another. And I think a lot of you are like me. You've moved a lot in your life. And you know what it is to be dislocated. You know what it is to be somewhere where there is normal, and then you move somewhere, and before the new normal starts, there's this weird in-between season, right? And so you go from what's often called orientation, it's that place of normal, and then you become disoriented, and then eventually you become reoriented. And the disorientation can be very difficult, and especially when you move, you know where the grocery store is at your old place. You know where the post office is. You can run to the store and be back in 10 minutes maybe. But when you move somewhere new, it could be an hour because you got lost on all the crazy new roads that don't make sense. Because when I moved here, I came from somewhere where the town was literally a grid. And it's not a grid here. These roads turn back on each other, and then they all seem to have similar names or even the same names. And so it was real disorientation for a while. And I think you guys, you get that. You know what it is to be in those places in life and experiencing that disorientation. And another name for that in-between time is liminal space. Okay, it's that between orientation and reorientation. It's that disorientation. It's that liminal space. And so we often, however, get ushered out of normalcy with something jarring that can happen. Sometimes we just don't even see it coming. And so it can be even extra disorienting, unsettling, confusing, and we could probably even say frustrating. So we have something like that happening here in John chapter 21. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 13. We have Jesus' disciples in one of those in-between places, and they're wondering, now what? What is next? They're unsure of what's going on, but they know it's not what it used to be. This is after the resurrection, and they know life is not what it was before the crucifixion. But we don't quite know what's coming because they've had a few encounters with the resurrected Jesus, and He seems to come and go and disappear on them. And so they're trying to figure out, what do we do now? And so we find these disciples in Galilee. And Peter decides, you know what, I'm going to go fishing. Because that's who he is. That's who he was before he met Jesus. And so some of the other disciples go with him. They're going to just go kill some time, maybe make some money probably, at least provide some breakfast for them. They're going to go fishing. But I want to tell you, just like in this text, these times of disorientation can be incredible times of perception and insight if we are intentional. And I believe that God wants to hone discernment for the days ahead. And I'm talking the days ahead in your personal life, in our church life, in the world at large with what he's doing, in the grand story, right, of redemption. He's looking for people who are going to be able to recognize his presence, to be seers of his presence in the in-between disoriented places. So let's read this text here in John 21. I'm going to start in verse 4. It says, "Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. So they are out fishing. They've been fishing all night, and they've caught nothing. And here Jesus is in the morning hours, standing on the shore. He called out to them, 'Friends, haven't you any fish?' 'No,' they answered. And he said, 'Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some.' And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, 'It is the Lord.' As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, 'It is the Lord,' he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, 'Bring some of the fish you have just caught.' So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, 'Come and have breakfast.' None of his disciples dared ask him, 'Who are you?' They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish." So we have an exhausted group of men who've had a very unsuccessful night, and here's Jesus, and he shows up at the shore, and he's watching them. And it says they didn't recognize him. And we know that this happens a few times after the resurrection. There's something about Jesus that's different that they don't recognize. And we see this on the road to Emmaus, right? When Jesus joins two disciples walking to Emmaus the morning of the resurrection, and they don't recognize him as they're talking with him. That's what's going on here. Jesus is present, but they don't know it's him yet. I always wonder in my own life, in situations like this, why does Jesus come in ways that I don't recognize him? Why does he come in new ways? It's probably because I get settled. And then I become complacent. But Jesus comes in my life, in your life, and just like he did here in the disciples, he comes to them in a new way so they could see things in a new way and be positioned in a new way. Because Jesus is getting ready to do something new and different, something completely other than what they had planned. So I want to say to you that wherever you are, whatever you're in the midst of in your life, know that Jesus is present. He tells us he's going to be present, right? He told his disciples, "I'm going to always be with you." But here they are. He's with them, but they don't know it. So I want to encourage you, whatever it is you're walking through, you may not recognize his presence as you're saying, God, where are you? But no, this is part of it. This is part of the transition to where he's taking you next. So I want you to think about it here just for a moment. Where are the places in your life where you don't recognize Jesus' presence? Maybe your personal life. Could be your work life, ministry. Where are the places that your heart is saying, Jesus, where are you? Where are you? You may even walk around church saying, my God is here, I'm confident, but in your heart, you're like, I'm just speaking Christianese today because I can't really let people know that I don't know where he's at. I don't know what he looks like in this season. That's where the disciples are at. There's purpose in what we think is the absence of Jesus. There's purpose in it. So we have a decision to make. Will I posture myself for discernment? Because let me tell you, Jesus wants you to discern him. He wants you to be able to recognize him. But he's okay with you having to humble yourself and question, and your heart being a little turmoil, so you can start to see and look in a different way. Does that make sense? He's completely okay with that. I'm not okay with that. I'm going to guess you're not either. But Jesus is very comfortable with it because he's all about our transformation and getting us to where we need to go next. So we go on here in verse 5, and it says, he called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No. One word answer. No. The right questions have a way of revealing reality, don't they? Simple question, but Jesus knew he needed to get them to see their reality. You know, I think part of humility is being open to others around you asking questions. And perhaps, even like here, even people outside what you are doing, they had no clue who he was. But here they are allowing him to ask questions, and they're responding to him. People on the outside of your situation often have a really good perspective. And sometimes we can become really closed down of, you don't get it, you don't know. You're not in the midst of this with me. Leave me alone. You don't know what we know. You haven't been out here all night. We are the fishermen. We know what we're doing. But they were open to the stranger on the shore. So Jesus asked them his question, and Jesus loves questions. You've probably heard me say this many, many times. In the Gospels record that he actually asked 307 questions, and he answers 3 of the ones that are asked to him. He's much more about pulling things out of us than just answering our questions. So here he is asking a pretty practical question. He knew their reality, but had they come to grips with it? And you know, sometimes God has to allow us to get to a place of depletion to embrace our reality. And the reality is, we can't do what he's called us to do in our own strength. We can't do it. And I think that's part of what he's doing here with his disciples. And liminal spaces have a way of reminding us that we're not everything that we think we are. So I move from one town to another, and I get lost going to a gas station. It humbles you. It humbles you to know I have to start over. I don't just know it all. I have to look things up. I have to be open to asking strangers, how do you get here? How do you get there? Liminal spaces, they remind us we're not all that. Know when what you are doing isn't working, and accept it. That's what the disciples were having to do. All night they had been fishing, and this wasn't working. Think about the fact that here's Jesus. He's getting ready to ascend to heaven, and he's getting ready to release his disciples to take the gospel throughout the world and to fish for people. He tells them, you're going to fish for people. But he needed them to remember what life was like before his presence in their lives. So they were fishermen before, and they're fishermen still, but they're fishing for people now. And Jesus is reminding them that it's not going to be like it was before. You're going to have to be empowered by my Spirit. You're going to have to lean on my presence. I'm going to be able to help you in ways you can't do in your own strength. And you think about this, just days or a few weeks earlier, it was the night of his arrest. Jesus told them, abide in me. He says, abide in me, because apart from me, you won't be able to do what I'm sending you to do. And I think that's what's going on here. I think he's helping them realize and remember they can't do this. Their strength is completely irrelevant when it comes to what they're really going to be fishing for. And Jesus is just reminding them, if you can't catch fish without me, don't deceive yourself into thinking you're going to catch people for my kingdom. So I think in our lives, we come to places where we become so depleted, so empty, and it's God's way of saying, don't do it without me. Don't try it. You're not called to do it without me. And sometimes because we're trying and trying and trying, he lets us and he stands there in an unrecognizable way. And we're like, God, where are you? God, where are you? And he's like, I'm here. But you need to wear yourself out a little bit more. Because I need you to know how much more my strength is going to empower you than your own strength, your own knowledge, your own abilities. So only when we are honest with where we are at are we ready to respond in obedience. So Jesus goes on to say this, he gives them instructions. Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. You guys, we have to fully own our futile attempts before we are ready to truly go in his direction. Our futile attempts. Everything we do must be done with Jesus, under his guidance. And here's what I want you to grab a hold of this. The disciples were not being called to labor for Jesus, and neither are we. We have been called to co-labor with him in what he is doing. See the difference? Sometimes we really get into the excitement of what we are doing for Jesus, and we're out in our own strength. We're out in the excitement, and there may even be so-called success in the eyes of the world, but Jesus isn't in it. We have been called to co-labor with him. And so there he is. I mean, think about this scene. There he is on the shore, and there they are working. And I kind of think he was chuckling at them. all these last few years I spent with them, and there's still a bunch of knuckleheads out there by themselves trying this. I know he has stood on the shore of my life and seen that several times. So they obey and they pull in a massive amount of fish. Here's the amazing thing. We think that's the miracle. But that's not the greatest part of this moment. Verse 7, then the disciple whom Jesus loved, which is traditionally thought to be John the apostle, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. In our obedience, we will open ourselves to recognize him in our midst again. As you're in that place of disorientation, of whatever's going on, you just obey the next step, and you're going to be able to recognize him slowly. It's going to come stronger and stronger. Stay put, stay rooted in him, and stay obedient. But here's the heart of this message today. We need people who can discern God's presence in the midst of disorientation. We need people who can see God's presence in the midst of chaos, confusion, and shock, and maybe even some anger. We need seers of his presence among us. We need people who can see him, see his presence. Not the crowds, not the success, but see him in all of it. We have to have discerning individuals who will recognize Jesus in these in-between places, because it's going to help usher us into the next place. This is the way it is in our lives, your family, your workplace. This is the way it is in the church, in our church. And it's not just my job to be a seer of the presence. I need you too. We need one another. And we may have different roles, but there's some of you, you're here today. Some of you have no clue what I'm talking about. And that's okay. You'll walk out of here scratching your head. What in the world is she even talking about? Some of you get this because you know this is what God's called you to do. You have such a desire to be a seer of his presence and to be able to see him in the midst of chaos and confusion and exhaustion, and to say, here he is. Here he is. You may not know everything, but you know this is how we get to the next place. Seers of his presence. John, let me talk just a moment here about John. John, I love the Gospel of John. He most likely is the one whom Jesus loved. That's how he wrote about himself. The name John is not used in the gospel, and so it's believed that's how he described himself in this gospel. And he was just known to be one to really lean in and to have a very intimate relationship with Jesus. This is the only one who recorded about the concept of abiding, where Jesus unpacked that his last night with his disciples, the abiding concept. You don't read about that in Matthew. You don't read about that in Mark. You read about that in John, because John got it. John's also the one that's believed to have received the revelation, wrote the revelation, to have been a seer. He saw visions, and this is what a seer or a prophet was. They saw visions. And you may think, well, I don't necessarily see visions. That's okay, because a seer is also someone who just sees the presence of God in places. You may not physically see him, but you see him with your spiritual eyes. And that's what John is. So he was able to discern the presence of Christ in this instance because of in how he lived his life in orientation, in the normal of what was normal before the crucifixion and resurrection. He had leaned into that. But because John discerned Jesus' presence, listen to this, Peter could take action with full confidence. He takes off and he jumps into the water, right? We often just get fixated on the action, on the doing. And I want to say this nicely, but firmly. We have a lot of people who know how to jump in the water, but have missed the discernment of where they are jumping. This is why the church today desperately needs seers. This is why God is calling seers. And it takes both, listen, and it's really nice if we have a balance of both, but let's get real. It may not be that way because we need one another. But John and Peter seem to be working something out, and you'll see this throughout the relationships in the Gospels, that John could perceive things. And Peter was ready to move, and it got him in trouble sometimes. But I think we're in a place where God's like, especially with the church, and the church in America, we've had enough jumpers. We need the seers to rise back up so there's direction to jumping. So Jesus has too many disciples jumping into the water. But they're not heading toward him because they haven't discerned him. And we get messed up when we think, well, but we've been successful. We need to redefine success in God's kingdom. Going on to verses 8 through 9. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. So while the disciples were out there doing their thing, they're working, they're striving in absolute futility, there was Jesus on the shore preparing breakfast. Because they arrive and it's already prepared. He didn't really even need the fish they brought in. He already had fish over the fire. So he's preparing breakfast. He's prepared a place of rest and intimacy. I want to encourage those of you who can identify with these disciples in their exhaustion, their disappointment, maybe their frustration, their lack of success. I want to encourage you, don't lose hope. You never know in the midst of all of that, as you're out striving, as you're out exhausted, you don't know where God is. You never know what he's preparing for you. But I know this. It's a place of rest, restoration, and nourishment. And this is what all endeavors should lead to, the place of intimacy. What's next? What's next? It's something that's inside of us. What's next? These disciples were thinking, what's next? Where's Jesus going? He just keeps disappearing. Why aren't we getting this ministry up and going again? And it's like Jesus saying, this is what's next. Sitting with me, eating with me, fellowshipping with one another around a fire, the place of intimacy. And Jesus said to them, here in verse 12, come and have breakfast. What an invitation. Come sit with me and eat. Come sit with one another and eat. Listen, no matter what he calls you to do, no matter how successful or unsuccessful it is, that place of intimacy, that's our ultimate calling. That is the ultimate what's next. And it says the disciples knew it was the Lord. They didn't even need to ask him. They had all come to that place that John was already at. How did they know? It was all familiar. How many fires had they gathered around with Jesus? How many loaves of bread had they passed around and shared in the years before? They knew his presence. Even though he came in a new way, a different way, it was unrecognizable, they recognized the place of intimacy, and they knew it was him. Don't wait until the places of disorientation to get serious about discerning his presence. Don't wait until you're jarred out of normalcy into disorientation. Lean into it now. Cry out for it now. Because you're going to be able to discern him in disorientation because you knew him in orientation. You knew him when everything was normal. When you get thrown into that middle place, that disorientation, that's how you're going to be able, like John, to know it's the Lord. It's the Lord. And you're going to be able to help others see him. So the place of intimacy is where he reveals himself in profound ways. It's where he confirms that we do know him. We don't know him because of our success or our failure. You know him because of that intimate place. We simply, this is all we have to do, is continually accept his invitation to come. Come. So, 2009, I had to go do my first 72-hour retreat by myself. And went out into the boonies of the Ozarks, Missouri. Ended up freaking myself out in the middle of the night because no one else was out there, and I was a baby. I just got freaked out, and anyway, I finally got settled and had a really just beautiful, beautiful time with Jesus. And the phrase I heard him say to me that I walked away with is, come often, stay long. Come often to the fire and stay long. That's his invitation for me, for you, for everyone. Come often, stay long. Keep coming back. And over the years, that phrase has just continually come back to me. And I take it as when Jesus, it's him calling me. Stephanie, come often. Come on, come back. And stay longer. Stay long. It's that concept of abiding. Abiding means remain. Stay there. Doesn't mean you're staying alone, isolated, out in the boonies. But you can stay rooted in the chaos, in the disorientation. We need seers of his presence. Those who can perceive Jesus in chaos, exhaustion, and complete disorientation. So my question for you is, are you willing to be positioned to see what others can't see? Are you willing for him to reveal himself in profound ways? Are you willing to be disoriented so he can awaken you to new dimensions of his being and see him in ways others can't perceive, and you can help lead them? I want to tell you there's a sacrifice to it. There's a sacrifice in the natural world. You got to be willing to come, accept his invitation over and over and over again, and say, I know I have a lot of dreams, I have a lot of goals and things I want to do in my life, but nothing compares to accepting the invitation to just sit in intimacy with Jesus. Okay, so that's our invitation here today, and I want to invite you to just posture yourself, and however you need to respond to the Lord to do it, whether you make your seat an altar or you come to the front and just sit with him in that place of intimacy. And I'm going to have Victoria sing. I want to encourage you, don't sing with her. I want you to sing over them this song, Be Thou My Vision. Let this be the prayer of your heart. Listen as you sit in God's presence. Listen to these words. Listen to the heart cry for him to be your vision. So Lord, speak to us right now. Lord, you're calling out seers. There's people right now whose spirits are being so stirred because they want more of you. They want to see you, Jesus. So Lord, lean into them right now. Whisper in their ear. Lord, be our vision. Be our vision.